In the early 1990s, my video game experiences were among the likes of the NES, the Sega Genesis, and the Super Nintendo. However, on one fateful day in 1996, my father decided to get the family the newly released PlayStation, at the expense of trading in most of my Super Nintendo games, without telling me. I guess times were tough, I wasn't exactly sure. There was nothing my 9-year-old self can do about it anyway, and that was over 20 years ago. Not to mention I didn't stay angry for very long. And why is that? Because the PlayStation will go on to be the console to introduce me to so many genres of games that would later cause me to become the video gamer I am today. It was the console where I experimented with a whole bunch of games, either through birthday gifts, demos from the underground samplers, games purchased with allowance money, or renting from stores like Blockbuster and Hollywood Video. Now the point of this video is to simply take a look back at all the games I used to play on this system before the likes of the PS2 entered the scene. So to be more accurate, between the years of 1996 and 2000. Also, don't be surprised if I don't happen to mention a title or franchise that you grew up with. I played a lot of games on this system, but I didn't play everything. Well, back when the console was still relevant. I guess I should give a brief history lesson over the console itself. Back when the likes of the Super Nintendo was flourishing in the business, Nintendo struck a deal with Sony to produce a CD-based add-on that would breathe new life into the already popular SNES. Now that sounds familiar. Shortened to the point, the two companies ended up falling out in the whole thing, and the CD add-on would later transform into what we know as the PlayStation 1. Boy, did that end up biting them in the ass. But could you imagine what the video game scene would be like today if Nintendo and Sony didn't split up and made video games together? Well, since Nintendo and Sony couldn't make amends, Nintendo ended up striking up a deal with Philips. And where did that lead them to?
Great! I'll grab my stuff!
There's your answer. Games for the PS1 weren't cartridges or anything like that, they were CD-ROMs, which allowed developers to create higher quality games thanks to the greater amount of space the medium contained. What you're not seeing here are the original cases that PS1 games were stored in when the system launched in 1995. They were about the same size as American Sega Saturn cases, which were just a damn nightmare to store on a shelf. As the years passed on, my collection of PS1 games would fluctuate wildly either because of negligence or just being new to the whole CD concept. It was the PlayStation that taught me that video games should be cared for, specifically CD-ROMs, because these babies were nowhere near as durable as these sons of bitches. Just looking at this thing gives me flashbacks to when I first laid eyes on it. The logo that immediately catches your eye, the lens that you were forbidden to touch, and whatever the hell these two ports did. Look at this, it's so naked. No DualShock analog sticks, no home button to go back to the menu, and the classic gray color that signified the second coming of video games to me, and that oh so nostalgic boot up screen. Oh shit. Since games were on CDs, and because this is the time before consoles had built-in hard drives, you needed memory cards to save game data. We didn't immediately have one when we first got the PlayStation, so you can imagine the pain I felt with certain games because I wasn't able to save to progress further at a later time. These things didn't hold much memory either, and because I couldn't afford a second memory card until much later, I had to delete old files to make room for newer ones. Also, this thing is loud, especially when the disc has a few scratches on it. If you didn't take care of your games, this bastard had no problem letting you know how much you fucked up. So where do I begin in terms of what I played? You know what, let's start with the racing genre.
Yo, here's what's happening. The awesome tunes are waiting for you.
Motor Toon Grand Prix, which was actually the second game in the series, seeing as the original never left Japan. It was this game that helped me grow interest in the kart racing genre, using items to disrupt your opponent and doing whatever you could to ensure first place victory. Not bad for what was considered a prototype to the Gran Turismo series. Yeah, I'm not kidding, look it up. The only way you could play multiplayer, however, was via the link cable system. That means you needed 2 PlayStations, 2 copies of the game, and 2 TVs. I'm assuming this was done to emulate the feeling of arcade-styled racing games, but what in God's name was wrong with split screen? But when I wasn't in the mood for something colorful and silly, I was going fast thanks to the likes of Ridge Racer and Ridge Racer Revolution. There wasn't really anything fancy about these games, just pure adrenaline-filled racing action with a bunch of drifting. I liked Revolution more than the first game, and you want to know why? The inclusion of a rear-view mirror, I shit you not. It was so satisfying to block oncoming cars from passing me, especially that fucking black car that was so disgustingly fast. Yeah, you stay there, you motherfucker! Get your ass back here! Ugh! I also like playing the Galaga games that you can play when the game was loading up. Well, speaking of that, it was thanks to the Namco Museum series in the PS1 that I was able to experience popular arcade games in the 80s, like Pac-Man or New Rally X, which I enjoyed for the theme song alone. Games like Baraduke didn't really tickle my fancy, and Bosconian didn't take long to start getting on my nerves with its constant blaring of Alert! What the fuck is Alert? It was also pretty cool to explore the 3D museum and learn a thing or two about the games being showcased. It became a goal of mine and my family to collect the entire museum series, and we got as far as owning N, A, M, and O, but never C. Nowadays, all I have left is N and O. But Volume 5 itself might be my favorite of the bunch because it introduced me to the likes of Dragon Spirit, a fun but incredibly fucking hard top-down shooter, and most importantly, The Legend of Valkyrie. I spent so many hours on this son of a bitch, and that soundtrack, man, such a joy to my ears. In this day and age, when you think about a musical game or rhythm game in general, your mind would probably jump to either Dance Dance Revolution or Rock Band, and truth be told, I probably would as well. But I remember the game that pretty much started that whole craze, Parappa the Rapper. It started this young dog named Parappa who relied on singing rap music for pretty much everything, learning karate, getting a driver's license, baking a cake, and taking a shit. I swear the timing on pressing buttons is strict as fuck for some of these songs, and I couldn't stand the likes of Cheap Cheap's cooking show because of it. It pissed me off to no end. And when I get stressed out, sometimes I just want to beat the living shit out of something. And while I played my share of fighting games on the Super Nintendo, it was the PlayStation where I played a whole bunch of them. Namely from Capcom, like the Street Fighter Alpha series and Street Fighter EX, which was the series' debut in 3D. This one hasn't exactly aged that well, and I don't think it flows as well as the Alpha series. There were also non-Street Fighter games I played like Darkstalkers, which was pretty much Street Fighter only with fairy tale creatures. But hey, there was also Marvel Superheroes, which was pretty much Street Fighter with Marvel characters. I guess my fighting game experiences weren't really varied. I recall playing Battle Arena Toshinden for one weekend and absolutely hating it because of how stiff and clunky it felt. And while I got a kick out of Tekken 2, I never felt the need to own the game and was just satisfied enough renting it. Punching someone in the face didn't cut it at times though. Sometimes I wanted a bit more mayhem and destruction. That's where Twisted Metal comes in, baby. Specifically the second game in the series. There's not much to explain here. You pick a vehicle, you drive around these designated arenas and blow shit up with missiles, bombs, special attacks, and machine guns. This is one of the games that we played the most when I was young, and it was so damn fun every single time we turned it on. That and Vigilante 8, which was Activision's response to the Twisted Metal series, and surprisingly enough, it was a damn decent game in its own right. It's pretty much the same thing, but there's a lot more carnage to behold thanks to destructible environments, though the sound design was a bit too loud at points. Overall, a good game though. As I observe the destruction of the Eiffel Tower, I immediately think of another game that I played that personified testosterone-filled action. And if you think I'm talking about Independence Day, you're wrong. I was a fan of the movie back when I was a kid, so I really looked forward to this game. It ended up boring the shit out of me, even when I used the cheat code to play as the alien spacecraft. Star Fox, this ain't. Nah, the game I'm talking about is 1. Yeah, that's its name. 1. You star as this amnesiac hero named John King with a gun for an arm, and that's all the backstory you're gonna get. The first level starts with a fucking explosion, and you're on your own from there on out. This game is destruction incarnate, and back then I thought it was so freaking awesome. Today I still think the game is pretty enjoyable, but the amount of explosions and bloodshed make it a bit hard to see where you're going at times, and I don't remember the first level being this unforgivable with making jumps. 1 is good old-fashioned arcade fun. It's not the best of its kind, but it's decent enough. If you wanted arcade-style shoot-'em-up action though, you played In the Hunt. God damn, I can't count the amount of times I died trying to beat this game. But I was mesmerized by the sprite quality. I didn't see anything like it on the Genesis or SNES. It reminds me a lot of Metal Slug looking back at it now. Oh, it was made by the same people. Well, that explains it. When I didn't want my screen flashing explosives all the damn time, I got my action from the likes of Metal Gear Solid, which I managed to attain by trading a Pokemon card, believe it or not. That's just how popular that card game was in the 90s, folks. I get requests to look at this game and the series in general all the time, and don't get me wrong guys, it's something I'm gonna do in due time, but there's a lot to absorb when you're reviewing a Metal Gear Solid game. The first game, however, was one I always enjoyed going back to. It's a great time for me. But while there were times I felt bloodthirsty, I liked relieving some stress on certain other genres. I didn't play many puzzle games on the PlayStation, not counting a demo of Intelligence Cube, but I loved me some Tetris Plus, produced by... It's exactly what it sounds like. It's Tetris, but with it being multiplayer, me and the guys always got a kick out of trying to out-Tetris each other. Tetris is now a verb. On certain occasions, I would also like to play some sports games with my dad, like Triple Play 97, Knockout Kings, and NBA Live 2000. We also like to play a lot of Hot Shots Golf, which I unfortunately don't own anymore. Weekends, however, were usually reserved for the time sinks. I'm talking RPGs, folks. The Super Nintendo filled my appetite with the likes of Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI, but the PlayStation is what got me hooked on Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy IX, some of my favorite RPGs of all time. Thanks to the Anthologies collection, I was even able to experience Final Fantasy V for the first time, and man were we missing out. Though if you're going to play Final Fantasy V nowadays, you're better off with the Game Boy Advance port. The Final Fantasy Chronicles finally allowed me to play the likes of Chrono Trigger without incinerating my wallet for an SNES copy, and eventually I ended up getting its sequel Chrono Cross, that I have yet to sit down and actually play. Oh, come on, my backlog is ginormous enough already. Besides, I'm playing Bravely Default now, damn it, leave me be. Since I was following Squaresoft so closely throughout the late 90s, This eventually led me to the likes of one of my favorite games on the PlayStation 1, Brave Fencer Musashi, a heavily underrated title that I think needs more love, starting with a digital release so that more people can play it. It's on the PlayStation Store in Japan, so come on, what's the deal? You play as a young boy named Musashi who's been summoned by the all-you-can-eat kingdom to stop the Thirst Quencher Empire. Yes, these types of puns are all over the fucking place, but I couldn't care because this game is fun. You can copy enemy abilities by absorbing them, you can gain experience to get stronger, and you can find upgrades to make Musashi more versatile. It's got everything I'm looking for in an action RPG. It really deserves its own review, so maybe I'll get to that later down the road. At the end of the day though, sometimes you just feel like playing something a bit more traditional. My past experiences with Sega and Nintendo led me to an affinity for platformers, and with the PlayStation we not only had our 2D side-scrolling games, but we also started getting a whole bunch of 3D games. These are the types of games I rented the most from rental stores. When a platformer is done right, it can be a very good time for me, and I had my share of both the good and the bad. I made sure to follow up on series I enjoy playing on the SNES like the Mega Man X franchise, and I think I'm one of the few people left in this world that doesn't think Mega Man X6 is that bad, but that's a discussion for another day. Licensed games usually came to me in the form of platformers. Rugrats was one of my favorite cartoons on Nickelodeon, especially before the animation bump, and I was pretty stoked to see a video game tie-in. You control the babies and play a bunch of minigames to collect pieces of Tommy's Reptar puzzle. The games are all based on episodes of the series, like playing miniature golf on Ice Cream Mountain, clobbering the likes of Mr. Fiend, and avoiding the likes of Thorg, who still wants eat. There's no reason to go back and play it nowadays, but back when I was 11, it was good enough for me. One licensed game that I remembered very fondly was that of Toy Story 2. It was a Christmas gift from my brother Elliot, but seeing that he was only 3 years old at the time it came out, I'm sure he didn't realize how much time I kept the game away from him. You control Buzz Lightyear through many levels based on the locations the toys go through in the movie, and progressing further requires you to collect Pizza Planet tokens. The game is your standard 3D collectathon that Super Mario 64 helped make enormously popular, but this is a case where that's not a bad thing at all. I think the controls are smooth, shooting enemies with Buzz's laser feels great, and the level design is pretty good. And watching cutscenes straight from the movie was always a plus in my books. When it wasn't a licensed game though, it was something like Gex, Enter the Gecko. I don't recall how I was introduced to Gex, but it was something I specifically requested for a Christmas gift in 1998. I didn't get to play the likes of Super Mario 64 until the early 2000s, but Gex 2 did a damn fine job filling the gap. You control Gex throughout the media dimension and collect remotes to unlock new areas in the hub worlds. There are loads of things to collect and plenty of secrets in each level. The story is very tongue-in-cheek, knowing damn well that it's a video game and contains a lot of pop culture references that unfortunately kind of date the game.
Hi, I'm here for the real-world interview.
Gex himself can be pretty humorous at times with his random but tangential quips, but at my age I really wish there was a mute button to get him to shut up. I get it, it's tail time.
Tail time!
Nevertheless, this is a game I spent countless nights on. I definitely recommend giving this a shot if you have a PS3. It was finally given a release on the PSN store just a few weeks ago. One of the games I planned on showing off for this video was Croc, Legend of the Gobos, but I had the displeasure of discovering that my copy doesn't work anymore. That doesn't surprise me too much, seeing that I've had this CD for well over 15 years, but rest in peace, my friend. Perhaps your time will come later. At the tail end of my PS1 phase, I started playing games without really thinking about what I just purchased. This led me to Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey, a game I probably spent a grand total of 2 hours on before regretting the purchase. At the risk of further infuriating Oddworld fans out there, I just didn't think it was that interesting. I didn't like the controls, and while I understand that the game's setting was supposed to invoke a sinister vibe considering the subject matter, it put me to sleep. You need to have a specific taste to enjoy this one, so I guess I don't have the taste buds for this sort of thing. Then there's Rascal, one of my biggest regrets ever on the PS1. If you want a textbook example of how not to do a 3D platform game that isn't Bubsy 3D, you look at this game. Bleak environments, incredibly ugly graphics, the most horrendous camera you can possibly have in a game like this, and horrible controls that put Superman 64 to shame. May I remind the audience that this game was released in 1998, and we already had much better games in years prior. In fact, Gex Enter the Gecko came out the same fucking year. I'm gonna go back to that game.
I'm flaming! In the manly way.
So many memories. The late 90s was a great time to be a video gamer, and I've been a loyal fan of Sony since then. Throughout the 2000s, they would continue to give me a bunch of fantastic titles on the PlayStation 2, and while the PlayStation 3 didn't have the best start when it came out, it later became one of my favorite systems of the past generation. The release of the PlayStation 4 really shows me just how far the brand has come along. I mean, back then it was all about the games, and occasionally using the system as a makeshift CD player. Now the PlayStation can play movies or stream video content. It can be an internet browser, and you can communicate with your friends via messaging and social media. Hell, you don't even need physical discs anymore. You can download the games off an online store and play it that way. Technology truly is a marvelous thing, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to see it move on. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Isn't there one franchise in particular that I've been blatantly ignoring this entire video, despite it being well known that I played the ever-living hell out of these games back in the PS1 days? Well, yeah, but I have good reason for doing so. If you think I'm just going to skim through my experiences with this certain marsupial, you got another thing coming. With that said, it's time for another marathon, ladies and gentlemen, so when we next meet up, we're looking at the franchise of games that I spent so many hours on that wasn't a Final Fantasy game. I'll see you guys then.